Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview, where we take a look at the stories being followed in the upcoming edition of the North Coast Journal. I'm your host, Dave Frank, and I'm joined by North Coast Journal's Arts and Features editor, Jennifer Famico Cahill, and freelance local writer and North Coast Journal contributor, Linda Stansberry. Welcome, Linda.
Hello.
Thank you guys for joining us this week, Thanksgiving week, and also COVID Purple Zone Week. Let's get right into it. Jennifer, what are you guys covering on this week's edition of the North Coast Journal?
Well, since you brought up the Purple Zone, let's discuss. I'm going to refer to my chart here to make sure I have this right, because Thad is not with us today, and his my mastery of numbers is not where he is. But as we discussed last week in our somewhat gloom and doom conversation about skipping over orange and going directly from yellow to red, that we were on the cusp of purple. And those of you not familiar, the state has a color-coded risk tier tool that determines, it's a kind of a chart that shows you where you are in terms of infection rates, positive tests, hospitalizations. There are a lot of different factors that go into it, and what's allowed to reopen or stay open under those guidelines. And now we were living for a while in, do you remember the salad days of having movie theaters at 50% capacity, indoor restaurants at 50% capacity, bars were open. I mean, you couldn't sit at the bar, but you could go to a bar. No more, folks. We're done. We can't have nice things. We were back into red for a hot second, and now we are in purple, which purple is like when you need a new word for the red zone. So we are now in what's called the widespread tier 1. There is no higher tier. This is it. We are at our upper limit of bad. So under these guidelines, gatherings are outdoor only with modifications and a maximum of 3 households together. That said, that is an allowable thing. Is it your best move? It is not. Your best move is not to gather at all. And your best move is to stay within your household bubble and keep to your own people. And that helps with everything from contact tracing. I mean, try and list everybody that you've been around. It gets complicated if you allow your households to mix. It also is to hopefully keep us from spreading infection. Again, we are supposed to act like we have it. Lots of people walk around with COVID-19 who are asymptomatic. So just because you feel fine, just because you look amazing, doesn't mean that it's time to go out and share your fantastic presence with the world. So retail operations are open indoors with modifications. That means everybody's got masks, everybody's got distancing. They're doing all that high-touch surface sanitation, et cetera, or sanitization. And they are at a maximum of 25% capacity. Consider that this is Christmas shopping season, right? People are doing all of their holiday shopping for Christmas and Hanukkah in the middle of a pandemic when a store can only have 25% capacity. So this is going to be really hard on retailers. If you can do retail shopping local and online, I would say do it. Also, shopping centers, malls, etc., open indoors with modifications, maximum 25% capacity, same situation. Common areas are going to be closed. I'm sorry, people who were devoted to the Mexican food at the mall, which I also love. You are going to have to take that to go. There is no food court option. Restaurants, outdoor only. And as we've discussed, outdoor only, while undeniably safer, is a really hard option for restaurants in terms of revenue. That cuts their money down to really just a sliver of what they make in order to just make ends meet, to pay overhead, to pay staff, et cetera, et cetera. And that means that restaurants, because this happens rather suddenly, have to adjust immediately. That means staff are being told not to come in. That means that inventory is probably not all going to get used up, and therefore that's money down the drain. Takeout is a great option still, if you can go and make sure that you are following distancing, wearing your mask, etc. And tipping like the money's monopoly money. And then the things to consider is, yes, they still have outdoor seating, but we're in that stage of weather where, it might seem like a good thing in the morning to go out and sit outdoors, and then by afternoon we've got rain, etc. It's going to be very hard on local restaurants that are already struggling, that are already having a hard time. Bars still closed. They were closed in the red zone. They remain so. Places of worship, outdoor only with modifications. So there's no going inside your church. It doesn't matter how spacious it is. Doesn't matter if people are wearing masks and distancing. Outdoor only with modifications. And offices are recommended to be remote. So that means if you can work from home, do it. You are a lucky person if you can do it. So take advantage. And my hope is that, I think all of our hope is that we will follow these rules. How about for real this time, instead of gathering and mixing households, and be able to get this thing under control to the point where we can at least move down a tier, because this was a rather steep climb, a steep and sudden climb that went from moderate to widespread very quickly for us.
Yeah, so this is all spelled out in a really nice little grid in the North Coast Journal I saw in this article that Thad wrote called Sounding the Alarm. And in there, it alludes to, Dr. Frankovich saying just to keep in mind that this is a critical time that everybody really does adhere to these guidelines, because the next couple of weeks we already expect the numbers to increase because there's a delay.
I realize that I'm a broken record with this, but, so is Teresa Frankovich. So, not alone. Travel and gathering. Those are the two big things that are driving this. Travel and gathering. And what are we looking at right now? It is Thanksgiving week. Don't travel. Don't gather outside your household. It's a very hard thing to say, and it's a sad thing, but it's only got to be sad for a little while, and it's a lot less sad than people getting sick or dying.
Absolutely. And the only other thing I was going to add to this sort of sad state of affairs is that Governor Newsom did put in place a curfew between, I think, 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., in part because he realizes that people like to go out and drink and talk louder in each other's proximity, and that's one way to get people to maybe curtail that behavior. Yes.
And, I don't know if, in Humboldt County, what are you doing after 10 p.m.? What are you doing? What is there to do other than milkshakes and breakfast at Tony's? I don't really see it. But for the next couple of days, it starts tomorrow. At least it is starting on a day when none of us want to move after dinner. If you are lucky enough to be home in your house enjoying Thanksgiving dinner, then, just let the tryptophan take over and just spend the evening digesting. Don't do this Black Friday madness. Just stay home, digest, and stay safe.
Well, thank you for those Thanksgiving wise words of wisdom, Jennifer. Let's transition now to you, Linda. Can you tell us about the article that you contributed to this week's edition of the North Coast Journal?
Absolutely. So this week, I wrote about a city council meeting that actually took place on November 17th. It's my first time doing this. I may have to crib from the paper right here, so just bear with me a little bit. The Eureka City Council met to approve language, repealing and replacing an ordinance that had been on the books regarding camping within city limits. So just shorthand for if you've been living under a rock over the last 10 years, camping refers to normally homeless folks in the city who need a place to be. And so the existing ordinance was invalidated by a 8th Circuit Court of Appeals regarding a decision in Boise, Idaho. That case is Martin versus the city of Boise. Basically, what the court ruled was that people who were sleeping on the streets when there's no other available shelter were affecting a basic human need. And so telling people, arresting people for sleeping on the streets is ruled unconstitutional. So Eureka had a camping ordinance on the books saying basically you can't camp on city streets and public places. And they decided last Tuesday to replace that with language establishing specific zones where involuntary camping would be subject to infractions, basically, by the Eureka Police Department. It was a long meeting. It was 2 hours long, just that one discussion item. So people were very heated about it, you might say.
So just to be clear, this idea of camping really was targeting people that are homeless, and the restrictions that were in place prior to this passing this new ordinance was deemed to be too restrictive based on the constitutionality of if you are alive and a human being, you need to be able to sit and sleep without a house someplace. So they were trying to thread the needle, and if you don't mind, I know the language was voted in, I think, with one dissent. So before we talk about what the dissenting opinion was, let's talk about what was voted in real briefly. I know we're going to check out the article online. We're going to read this. We're going to get all the backstory. But just generally speaking, like, what's the proposed new rule for Eureka?
Well, basically, the city attorney drafted up some maps and descriptions of specific areas in Eureka. So we're talking business districts and trail districts. So Old Town Eureka, the Waterfront Trail, Henderson Center, and the Northern Gateway or Bridge District. And so in those areas, involuntary camping, referred to people who are camping out of necessity, is no longer allowed. However, it seems clear from discussion and after talking with the Eureka Police Department that enforcement of that, it's more likely it'll be used as an enforcement tool as a means to contact people who are sleeping on the street, talk to them about services. They indicated it'd be very unlikely it would actually result in arrest.
Gotcha. So just to be clear again, sorry, like there's places that you really aren't supposed to be by statute now, but there are places that it's more acceptable. And based on enforcement, I think there was some feedback from EPD, Eureka Police, that really, like you said, what they're doing is they're approaching folks and saying, hey, there are some resources available. You really can't stay in this exact spot. So that all makes sense. But I think that there's this sort of unfinished business kind of that maybe was why Council Member Castellano might have been against it. She insinuated a couple things, which I'll ask you about. But what I'm going to propose to you is that part of it is that, well, the police technically aren't in the business of telling people where they can camp out, because if multiple people go to that same spot and then there's a public complaint, then they have to disperse them. And then there's some kind of, maybe ACLU claim, hey, you told them they could stay there and now you're telling them that they can't. So there's this balancing community interest with humanity, acknowledging that people need help entering these resources, but then maybe those resources don't align perfectly with what those people want. And so they choose to be outside and they're allowed to be outside, but nobody can kind of tell them where they can be. So if you don't mind, kind of comment on that and then say, what was the opposing position of the council briefly.
Well, it's funny you should put it that way. You know, the city of Eureka has been doing this dance for quite a while, since 2013, when a lawsuit was filed against the city after a person broke their or their shoulder in an established homeless camp behind the Palco Mall, or behind the Bayshore Mall where the Palco Marsh is. And a lot of questions rose out of that. There was some testimony that came out in the lawsuit to the effect that police have been telling people, camp there, out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, it was established after that encampment became, you know, several hundred people strong, and became a major conundrum for the city about, you know, what to do with all of these people in this quasi de facto okay homeless encampment that wasn't a good long-term strategy. So that was a several years worth of discussion about, you know, what to do about that, several different strategies. And so currently we don't have that same kind of entrenched specific location. But we do have people camping at various places in the city, and I think the city would be very hesitant to establish, you know, one place where they would say, you won't get, you won't get asked to pack up and move if you camp here. So there's a real hesitance to do that for some very good legal reasons. And that was one of the concerns in brief brought about by Leslie Castellano. Basically, you know, is what we have now with this language, is this strong enough of a legal framework that it's not just going to get challenged and, you know, become a ongoing thing that the city has to react to? Is this something that we want to revisit and make sure that our position is straight? And also, she had some concerns about the language around enforcement, about it being unclear exactly how it would be enforced or what that would look like in practice for the Eureka Police Department.
So this passed. This is now the law. And now with these uncertain, you know, questions about it, they're just going to sort themselves out through practice and implementation. That's where we stand.
It was approved. They are bringing it back for a second reading at a later city council meeting with some new language in there. The original legal ramifications for violating the ordinance were a misdemeanor charge, and that was brought down to an infraction. There was a lot of discussion, and I believe the city council wanted to see the final language one more time after those changes were implemented, but I doubt that it's going to be overturned.
Thanks, Linda. This is great. It was great meeting you for the first time on the show. Hopefully we see you again soon. And we'll hear more about how this evolves. Oh, good. I like to hear that. I like to hear that, Jennifer. Thank you.
You know, as we were discussing earlier, Linda has been a staff member at the Journal before. She's freelanced for us a lot of times. And you can occasionally find her doing maybe a movie review, writing about elder care, writing about a bunch of different things, occasionally a recipe. Once in a while, she dared to write about a homesteader's recipe for banana slugs a long time ago when the earth was still cooling. So you'll see Linda again.
Well, right on. Now's a good time to ask Jennifer, is there anything else you'd like to add this week before we wrap up?
Well, as we are looking at, you know, by the time people see this, Thanksgiving will have passed, but we'll all still be full. And we'll still be wrangling leftovers. And it's a good time to probably think about people dealing with food insecurity. This week, Andre Kramblet, who is another person who freelances for us once in a while, Andre is Karuk, and he wrote this week about the Yurok tribe's move toward food sovereignty. So when we talk about food insecurity is a really big problem in a lot of rural areas, along with sort of income issues related to food insecurity, like, you know, not knowing if you have enough money for groceries. There's also just access to groceries. And the Yurok reservation was declared, I think, in 2011 to be a food desert by the USDA. And the definition of a food desert has to do with being a place where relatively low-income folks are living without access to grocery stores. They might be far away, they might be insufficient, or they might be, a drive away for people who don't have cars. So there's a lot of that happening on the Yurok reservation, where there are two sort of gas station mini mart options, and they are inadequate for meeting all your grocery needs. And depending on where you live on the reservation land, it could be that your nearest grocery store, like a real grocery store, is maybe 16 miles away. Or it could be, if you want to be in a city where there are more than one grocery store options, then you're looking at a 60-mile trip to Crescent City. And that means gas money. That means having a car available. That means time. Think about, how our lives go. Do you have time to make a day of traveling to get food, And then on top of that, there are income issues. Whereas we're looking at around 12.9% in 2017. That's the most recent numbers we found from the USDA, saying 12.9% of Americans were using nutritional assistance like SNAP, the SNAP program.
Yeah.
And on the Yurok reservation, the numbers that we got from Tony Van Landingham, who is the president of the Yurok Agricultural Corporation, it was something like 64% of households. So the number of people relying on nutritional assistance is vastly higher on the Yurok reservation. And so what the tribe decided to, or rather the Yurok Agricultural Corporation decided to do was buy this old nursery. So there was this nursery in Wichipec that they've decided to take on and use as a place to sell or to distribute rather seeds and starts for people to be growing their own vegetables, which is a very old tradition for tribal families. And, we think about how, lots and lots of people in rural areas are able to grow their own food. It allows you that freedom, the money that you would spend on groceries, the time you would spend getting them, being able to control your own food supply. That is food sovereignty. And especially for Native people who've had their foodways, their traditional foodways, so destroyed, when it comes to salmon and other resources, those foodways have been, nearly completely destroyed, and they're trying to build them back now, but there need to be other options too. And one of the things that Andre pointed out that surprised me in this article, I didn't think about it, was he mentioned that not only are you feeding your family with the things you're growing, not only are you, kind of making ends meet, but you're also providing food for animals that you also depend on. Whether you are hunting, fishing, etc., contributing, more food plants to our environment contributes to their survival, and then Native people's survival too. So it's a great story, and I encourage everybody to read it.
This is really encouraging. I think food sovereignty is a huge issue, and thank you guys for covering it. I'm going to actually, on my end, I'm going to investigate this a little further because I think that this is a story worth telling in more detail. So thanks, Jennifer. Everybody out there, that's just about going to do it for us this week. North Coast Journal is available on newsstands now and online. Pick one up, stay informed. And until next time, Jennifer and Linda, take care, and we'll talk to you again soon.
See you next time.
Happy Thanksgiving, guys. Take care.